I remember the exact moment I placed the thick manila folder on the kitchen table, my heartbeat churning in my ears as I watched it settle there, an unspoken threat in broad daylight. My name was typed clearly on the front, just beneath the hospital's letterhead, and inside were words that would change everything if they bothered to look. But the dog barked at the back door, my daughter rummaged for cereal, and my son stomped upstairs cursing me under his breath. My ex-husband, well, not yet legally ex, but close enough, slid past me to gather the mail, ignoring my presence the same way he'd been ignoring every plea I'd made for weeks. I tried to catch someone's eye, to see if the weight of the envelope registered, to sense if maybe one of them had guessed something was wrong. But the moment I tried to speak, my voice caught in my throat, and I felt the edges of my vision close in, panic and hurt welling up so fast it made my head spin. I couldn't bring myself to announce what I had learned that morning, not after I'd caught them all whispering about new travel plans, how they'd rearrange certain rooms in the house, and how they'd manage finances once the finalization of my marriage's death knell was complete. They had noticed the envelope. I could see it in the way my daughter's eyes flickered toward it, just once, but she said nothing, as though acknowledging it might slow down her day. It was in the way my husband, still wearing the ring out of convenience, I guess, shook out the rest of the mail, but let that folder remain untouched. It was as if they all believed if they didn't open it, then there wasn't anything to worry about, or perhaps they knew but just didn't care enough to confirm. And so I left it there, breathed in the stale air of the kitchen that was once so warm and inviting, and retreated to the laundry room to fold a basket of clothes that weren't mine. The dog, an aging terrier mix named Lady, followed me, tail between her legs as though she sensed the storm in my mind. I whispered under my breath, "They won't even ask," and she licked my hand as if to say she understood. I didn't know then that I was already mapping out my escape, that in my quiet heartbreak, an ember of self-preservation was finally burning. I told myself that if no one bothered to read it by the end of the day, I'd pack it away, along with my illusions of what family meant, and that I'd find a way to live on my own terms, however short or long those terms might end up being. I was older when I had my children. I'd waited and waited to find the right time, the right man, the right circumstances, and life, in its twisted humor, gave me opportunities just late enough that I was often exhausted and out of breath. They were teenagers now, old enough to see me as some nuisance in the house, a fated supporting character in the spectacle of their adolescence. My husband, Peter, a real estate attorney who wore crisp suits and a perpetually sour expression, liked to remind me how tired I looked, how my worries aged me. I used to confide in him, used to cry into his shoulder when I felt the stress of motherhood or the disappointment of life bearing down on me, but these past few years had turned him cold. He'd criticized my cooking, my weight, the fact that I no longer dyed my hair to cover the silver threads. There'd been an affair, or maybe a few of them, though I never found concrete proof. Just the perfume, the late-night texts from nameless clients, and the way he spent most of his free moments scrolling through pictures of properties far more glamorous than our old suburban home. And his family, my in-laws, had always made me feel like an intruder, as though I should be grateful for even existing in their pedigree. Over time, it chipped away at my sense of self until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Then, that morning, the results from my biopsy came in. The doctor's voice rang in my head, numb and distant. Malignant, immediate attention, further tests needed, a thorough treatment plan to be devised. We will discuss options. I found it so surreal. I wanted to wail, wanted to break something, but instead I'd come home, carefully set the folder on the table, and waited for the people who claimed to love me to notice. My son, Jordan, yelled something about not being able to find the cable for his phone charger, and I heard him banging doors in the hallway. My daughter, Cynthia, had her headphones plugged in, ignoring the world as she stared at her phone. I gazed at them with a bittersweet ache, longing to see a glimpse of the children I'd once cradled against my chest, remembering how they used to run to me for every scrape or bruise, how their eyes would well up with tears if I so much as frowned. Now they were tall, they were distant, and I was the afterthought. Yet something in me fought the cynicism. I tried to give them reasons, tried to blame their father's influence, the stress of the looming divorce, the sense that maybe the family we all clung to was an illusion that had fractured years before. But deep down, a tiny kernel of resentment sprouted each time they brushed past me without a word. I had given them my body, my time, and my soul. And now, facing the possibility of a drawn-out battle with a disease that cared nothing for how much I had sacrificed, I was met with a hush so loud it threatened to drive me mad. I told myself to hold on, to see if maybe, come dinner time, they would glance at the folder, notice my trembling hands, and ask if I was all right. All I needed was one question, one flicker of genuine concern, and I might have felt ready to gather the courage to speak. But the hours passed, and evening settled over the house with an awkward tension. Lady sat by my feet while I boiled pasta and prepared sauce. Peter was in the den, rummaging through files, planning some new business venture, or maybe just counting the minutes until he could leave the house under some excuse. The kids, as usual, ate quickly and left their plates on the table. No one asked about my day. No one asked about the folder. No one noticed the tension in my voice when I said, "Dinner's ready." I ate alone, stirring the noodles around on my plate until they turned cold. In that silence, with the dog as my only companion, I understood how truly alone I was in a house full of people. At some point that night, I found Peter in the bedroom, standing near the dresser that used to be filled with my clothes. I say used to be, because I had been moving them quietly to a small closet in the guest room, preferring the privacy to his constant critique. He was scrolling through his phone, not even acknowledging me. So I cleared my throat and said, "I went to the doctor today." He barely looked up. Everything good. The bitterness in my mouth spread like poison. "There's a folder on the table," I continued. He frowned a little, as though annoyed by my attempt at conversation, then shrugged. "I've been busy," he said, and that was all. He walked out without waiting for me to reply. That was the moment I realized I was done. I crawled under the sheets, pulled them up to my chin, and tried to imagine the next day, the next week, the next year. The exhaustion pressed on me like a living thing. In the darkest hours, insomnia kept me company. I made a mental list of every argument, every betrayal, every time I'd felt so small and insignificant. I remembered how I'd once felt powerful in my own quiet way, how I loved my job at the local library before they'd told me to quit because the kids needed me more, because Peter had insisted that my time was better spent maintaining the household. I recalled the fleeting joys, the ways I'd buried my wishes so that everyone else could be comfortable. I thought about the diagnosis in that folder, how it was my own body turning against me, but it felt no more hostile than the people under this roof. Then a strange calm settled over me as I thought about the house itself. It had been my grandmother's. She had left it to me in her will, a final act of grace for the granddaughter who'd found solace in her presence. Peter had never bothered to see whose name was actually on the deed. He assumed it was his, or joint at least, or he'd never thought much about it at all. But it was my name, my inheritance, my escape hatch. For so long I had been terrified of losing everything, of being alone, of not being able to stand on my own 2 feet. I had clung to the idea that somehow, if I just tried harder, if I made fewer mistakes, if I gave more and more of myself, maybe my family would see me, love me, care for me. But the house was mine, the dog was mine, and ironically, so was the debt they thought we shared. I had enough to start again if I had the courage. I felt the tears slide down my face as the realization settled. If I sold the house, I could take Lady and leave them to figure out their own futures. They clearly had no interest in mine. The thought lit a spark in my chest, not a pleasant one, but a spark nonetheless. In the morning, the folder was still untouched, just as I'd expected. Cynthia was on the phone with a friend, and Jordan had stormed out early, claiming some group project meeting. Peter had left a note saying he'd be home late. My chest felt hollow, my throat tight, and yet I felt strangely resolute. A numbness took over, pushing aside the immediate terror of what was happening in my body. I stuffed the envelope into a drawer, out of sight. I canceled all the usual chores I would have done for them, no laundry, no grocery shopping, no calls to the school counselor about Jordan slipping grades. Instead, I made an appointment with a different real estate office, one that was not affiliated with Peter's circles. I wanted an independent assessment, someone who wouldn't tip him off. They arranged for an agent named Miranda to come by that afternoon. Miranda arrived precisely at 3, and I greeted her quietly. She was younger than I'd expected, bright-eyed, and wore a neatly pressed navy suit. She glanced around the foyer, took a quick note on her tablet, and asked if we could do a walkthrough. I felt uneasy, as though I were betraying a secret. But that was the point, wasn't it? My life had become a series of secrets, half-truths, and unspoken hurts, so what was one more? We roamed from room to room. I noticed how the wallpaper in the dining room had started peeling at the edges. I saw the nicks on the wooden banister from the times Jordan and Cynthia used to slide down as children. I sensed the ghosts of 1,000 memories, some sweet, some heartbreaking. In the background, Lady's nails clicked softly on the floor as she followed us. Miranda was polite, professional, but I could see sympathy in her eyes. She likely spotted the boxes already partially packed in the guest room, the subtle signs that this was more than just a casual inquiry. She assured me that a house of this vintage, with good bones, in a decent neighborhood, could command a very respectable price, especially if I was willing to do a few minor repairs. I whispered that I was. That night, I felt a small flutter of defiance in my stomach when the kids demanded dinner. I told them, "There's bread, cold cuts, make a sandwich if you're hungry." They bristled, complaining that I was the mother, that I was supposed to cook. I didn't engage. Peter was still nowhere in sight, and I suspected he was at some bar or with some woman or both. I wasn't sure I even cared anymore. I went upstairs to the guest room, locked the door, and looked at the folder again. It was too heavy in my hands, too real. I remembered the doctor's gentle face, how he had said we caught it early but needed an aggressive approach. I felt a surge of anger at the unfairness of it all, anger at how I was left to carry this knowledge alone. My gaze fell on a small framed photo of my grandmother I kept on the nightstand. She had been a formidable woman, widowed early and yet determined to carve a life for herself and her children. She had fought for everything and taught me never to let anyone stand in my way. I swore then and there I wouldn't let this illness define me, and I wouldn't let these people in my house keep trampling my spirit. If they wanted me gone, if they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. But I would be the one leaving on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up early, ignoring the usual routine. I sat down with a cup of coffee and wrote a list of tasks. First, I called the hospital back, set up the next round of scans. I made sure they had my cell number and told them not to bother calling the house phone, as I might be switching residences soon. Second, I arranged for a locksmith to come by, because if I was going to sell the house, I wanted to ensure I had control of the keys. Third, I made an appointment to meet with an attorney who specialized in divorces for women who needed a quick and clean exit. Finally, I went online and looked at potential properties in other states, places by the ocean or up in the mountains. I knew I might need a calmer environment if I was going to fight this disease, somewhere that would let me heal in peace. The idea felt surreal, but also exhilarating. I busied myself cleaning out old closets, throwing away junk that had accumulated over the years, dusty trophies, old clothes no one wore anymore. The kids complained that the house felt weird with everything being rearranged. "Why are you throwing away my stuff?" Cynthia shrieked when she found me bagging up clothes she hadn't touched in years. Jordan muttered something about me, acting psycho. I said nothing, just let them see the determination in my eyes. For once, they seemed unsettled. I realized that I had always been so predictable, so accommodating, that even a slight deviation from my usual deference felt shocking to them. In the evening, Peter came home and demanded to know why he had seen a woman in a business suit on our property. I calmly told him it was for an appraisal. He stared at me, genuinely confused. "What do you mean, appraisal?" I let the silence stretch. Then he laughed, a short, dismissive bark. "You can't be serious." "We're not selling the place," he said. "I am," I replied. The look on his face was pure disbelief, followed by anger. "You don't get to make decisions like that on your own," he snapped. I stared right back. "It's my name on the deed." You'd know that if you ever bothered to pay attention. He went pale. But that's not how we arranged it. He trailed off, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He realized he had never actually transferred the title. He'd always assumed I was just a naive housewife, but I was in fact the sole owner. The argument that erupted was like a long-dormant volcano finally unleashed. He yelled, threatened, called me names I'd never repeat. The children hovered in the hallway, wide-eyed. Part of me expected them to speak up, to defend me, but they just watched, uncertain where the power would fall. For so long, Peter had been the authoritative figure, the provider, the bully who got his way. Now, faced with the possibility that I was seizing control of the one asset that mattered to him, this house, he lost his composure. He slammed doors, tossed some of my belongings around. I just stood there, arms crossed, unflinching. I had too much at stake now to let fear overtake me. Lady growled, a low, warning sound that startled him. "Keep your stupid dog away from me," he hissed, and the word stung because it was the first time he'd openly admitted she was mine, not his, not ours. Just as they'd done with everything else, they'd left her care to me. But at least Lady was loyal. At least she stayed by my side as he stormed out. I was shaking when it was over, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The children retreated to their rooms. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to beg them for comfort, to say, "Don't you see what I'm going through?" But I swallowed that urge, reminding myself that if they truly wanted to be there for me, they would come on their own. They didn't. So I went back to the guest room, closed the door, and forced myself to breathe slowly until my heart stopped racing. I told myself to remember that feeling, that electric surge of defiance, because I was going to need it. Days turned into a surreal dance of real estate steps, medical appointments, and hidden phone calls to lawyers. Peter pretended nothing was happening in front of his colleagues and friends, but in private, he seethed. He tried to coax the kids into siding with him. Cynthia had tears in her eyes, asking me why I was destroying the family. Jordan was furious, calling me selfish, telling me that if I sold the house, he wouldn't have a place for his friends to hang out. I listened to their accusations with an odd sense of calm. Had they forgotten about the folder? Did they even know or care that their mother was facing a life-threatening illness? The tension made the air feel thick, oppressive. I could hardly eat, hardly sleep, but I pressed on, fueled by the knowledge that if I stayed, I might as well lie down and let the cancer take me without a fight. Miranda, the real estate agent, was a godsend of practicality. She arranged showings, made recommendations for small fixes, and always treated me with respect. We moved quickly, listing the house at a competitive price. Almost immediately, offers poured in, surprising me. I realized how many memories, both good and bad, lived in these walls, but to an outsider, it was just a piece of property with potential. The kids couldn't ignore it anymore once prospective buyers started touring the living room. Cynthia locked herself in her bedroom, refusing to let people in, blasting her music. Jordan loomed menacingly in the hallway, trying to scare them off. Peter threatened legal action, but every lawyer he contacted told him the same thing. The house was solely in my name, left to me by my grandmother, so unless he had proof of some arrangement, he was powerless. He resorted to intimidation, cornering me in the kitchen late at night, ranting about how I was stealing his rightful future. He said I'd regret it, that no one would want a middle-aged woman with failing health. He said the kids would resent me forever, that I was condemning them to a life of uncertainty. I stared at him, my hands trembling, and managed to whisper, "You ignored my cancer report on the table. Why should I trust you with my future?" He tried to retort, but the words must have lodged in his throat. Another week passed in that suffocating atmosphere. I was going to the doctor more often. They ran scans, drew blood, scheduled me for a series of treatments. Alone, I endured the quiet terror of waiting rooms, the pang of seeing other patients with supportive families by their sides. Once, I saw a woman about my age with a teenage daughter, the girl's arms wrapped around her mother in comfort. I felt a wave of envy so strong it nearly made me dizzy. I held back tears until I got back to my car, Lady waiting in the passenger seat because I couldn't bear to leave her in that house. I clung to her fur and sobbed, letting out the pain that I refused to show anyone else. She whimpered softly, licking the salt from my cheeks, the only living creature who seemed to sense my anguish. When I returned home that afternoon, I found Cynthia in the kitchen with a few of her friends, rummaging through snacks, laughing. She barely gave me a glance, except to say, "We're out of soda. Can you get more?" I didn't answer. I simply walked upstairs. It wasn't worth fighting about. I was done being their servant, done being invisible. If they needed something, they could figure it out. The tension in the house escalated so that we spoke in clipped sentences, if at all. Even so, they still didn't open that damned folder. They saw me carrying it to and from the guest room, saw me tucking it away in my purse on my way to appointments, but they never asked. It was as if acknowledging it might shatter their comfortable narrative that I was just a fixture in their lives, not a person with needs, pains, and a fast-approaching battle that would require every ounce of strength. Meanwhile, the house listing gained serious interest. Miranda brought me 2 compelling offers in the same day. I accepted one that was slightly lower but allowed a faster closing. She explained we'd need about a month to finalize everything. I said that was fine. My intention was to move across the state, maybe near the ocean. I'd already started searching for a small cottage or apartment, somewhere quiet. When I mentioned it to my lawyer, he approved. "Just be careful," he said. "Your husband might lash out. He knows he's losing his grip on the property." I understood the risk. But I also knew that if I hesitated, if I showed any sign of wavering, they would pounce on me like sharks circling wounded prey. Sure enough, Peter's last-ditch effort was to try to turn the children into soldiers against me. One evening, I came home from a consultation at the hospital to find them both sitting at the table. That same table where the envelope had once waited. The dog was nowhere in sight, likely hiding upstairs. Peter stood by the sink, arms crossed, staring at me like a prison guard. Cynthia started sobbing, telling me how unfair I was being, how this was going to ruin her social life, how all her friends lived nearby. Jordan glared, saying he hated me for uprooting him. They kept throwing accusations. I was selfish, I was a bad mother, I was irresponsible. They insisted that I had no right to just sell the house like this, that I needed to reconsider. I looked at them, my heart pounding, waiting for one of them, just one, to mention my health, to say, "How are you feeling? How can we help?" But it never came. Finally, I snapped. I let out all the anger, hurt, and betrayal I'd bottled up. I told them that if they had opened the folder, they would see that I needed a fresh start. I needed to fight for my life without their toxicity draining me every day. I screamed that for years I had cooked, cleaned, provided, and loved them, and they couldn't even see me as a human being with fears and needs. My voice shook with fury and heartbreak. Cynthia was stunned into silence. Jordan looked at me as though he'd never seen me before. Peter just clenched his jaw. Then I walked away, feeling sick, shaky, but also strangely liberated. I prepared for the possibility that the children would follow me, apologize, try to bridge the chasm. But they didn't. Instead, over the next few days, they acted even colder, as though I were the enemy. Cynthia snapped that she planned to stay with her father no matter what, that she didn't want to move with me. Jordan muttered about how he'd couch surf with friends until college. I realized that perhaps, just perhaps, I had lost them long before this. Maybe they were always going to resent me, for reasons that might be fair or unfair, but either way, I couldn't force them to love me or to care about my illness. The grief was like an open wound, but I pressed on, focusing on the final steps of the sale. When the day came to sign the papers, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Miranda handed me the documents, and I stared at the lines where my name would go, signifying the end of an era. I remembered how my grandmother would let me stand on her toes so we could dance to old records in the living room. I remembered the Christmas mornings, the birthdays, the time Cynthia had the flu and I sat by her bed all night holding a cold cloth to her forehead. I remembered how Jordan used to scribble crayon drawings on the walls. I remembered the fights with Peter, the nights I cried myself to sleep, and the numbness that had settled over the past few years. With a deep breath, I signed, my hands steady. The house was sold. I had 2 weeks to move out. That night, Peter ranted, threatened to sue me, to drag me through the mud in court, to sabotage my divorce. But I saw the emptiness in his eyes. He knew it was over. The kids avoided me, but I heard them whispering to him, asking about their living arrangements. He was too proud to admit he didn't have it figured out yet. Maybe they'd move into a smaller rental, or maybe they'd try to live with his parents for a while. It wasn't my concern anymore. I felt selfish and it hurt. But I had no more illusions that staying would fix anything. Amidst this upheaval, the cancer loomed like a dark shadow. I scheduled my treatment to begin 2 weeks after the closing date, hoping I could relocate and settle somewhere near a specialized clinic. I was fearful, yes, but also determined. I wanted to live. I wanted to find some shred of joy or peace, even if it was small. In the darkest moments, I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. I told myself that once, I was a mother who loved her children more than life. That part of me was still there, but overshadowed by a new, raw instinct to survive on my own terms. I tried to quiet the guilt by reminding myself that I couldn't force them to care, and that staying would only drain the little strength I had left. 2 days before the final move, I stood on the front lawn and watched as Lady ran in circles, chasing a squirrel up a tree. This had once been a place of innocence, a safe haven I thought I could preserve forever. My father had passed away here, my grandmother had left it to me. It was filled with ghosts, but also memories of a simpler time. Maybe I should have fought harder to protect it. Maybe I should have refused to let my husband's negativity infiltrate these walls. But regrets were pointless now. The new owners would be moving in soon, a young couple with big plans for renovating. I silently prayed they would build a life here filled with kindness, that the laughter of a new family might wash away all the sorrow we left behind. On the day I finally gathered my things into a moving van, there was no tearful farewell for my children, no last attempt at reconciliation. Peter hovered, arms crossed, probably waiting to see if I would falter. He made a snide comment about how I was making the worst decision of my life, how I was delusional to think I could handle an illness on my own. I ignored him. The kids were in their rooms, likely indifferent. I left notes, short and unsure, telling them I would always love them, that if they ever needed me, they could call, and I would do my best to be there. I didn't write about the cancer because I wanted them to open that folder themselves, to see what they had chosen to ignore. Maybe one day they would. Lady jumped into the passenger seat of my old sedan as I steered away from the house for the last time, the moving truck following behind. I kept expecting a wave of regret to crash over me, or some spontaneous heartbreak. But what I felt was a quiet, trembling relief. The finality stung, but it also freed me from the relentless tension that had made living there unbearable. I had a small rental lined up by the ocean, close to a reputable cancer center. I told myself that each day would be a fight, but it would be my fight, waged on a battleground of my choosing, not in the stifling environment of that house. The road stretched out before me, and as I drove, I caught glimpses of the dog in the rearview mirror, gazing out the window, ears perked. She looked so at ease, so ready for a new adventure. I whispered a promise to her, and maybe to myself, that we would find a way to keep going, no matter how tough it got. The wind carried the faintest scent of salt, letting me know I was nearing the coast. My heart pounded with a mixture of dread and hope. Soon, I would begin treatments, face the reality of hospital rooms and the exhaustion that comes with chemotherapy or surgery or whatever else they decided was necessary. But for the moment, I had the open road and the promise of possibility. I was scared, yes, terrified even, but I also felt empowered in a way I never had before. I was taking charge of my life, choosing myself for once. And that choice, painful as it was, felt like the first step toward healing. When I reached the rental property, a modest cottage with chipped paint on the railing and a tiny porch that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, I parked and sat for a moment, letting the sound of waves crashing on the shore surround me. My phone vibrated with a text. I expected some hateful message from Peter or the kids, but it was from the attorney, confirming that I was now officially in the final stages of the divorce proceedings. I took a shaky breath, turned off the engine, and stepped out onto the gravel driveway, Lady at my heel. The air was cooler, tinged with sea spray. I felt every nerve in my body alight, uncertain but alive. Inside, the cottage was sparse, just a few pieces of furniture, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with enough space for a bed and a dresser. It smelled slightly musty, as though it hadn't been aired out in a while. The landlord had left the key under the mat, trusting me enough not to break in or do something nefarious. I flicked on the lights, wincing as they buzzed overhead. Lady trotted around, sniffing corners, checking out the new territory. Outside, through the open window, I could hear seagulls. The place felt foreign, yet I realized I might be able to make it my own. Over the next few hours, the movers arrived with the boxes that contained the remnants of my former life. I directed them to stack them in the living room, feeling too drained to unpack just yet. When they left, I sank down onto the threadbare couch, letting the quiet envelop me. Then I heard the tapping of Lady's paws as she hopped up beside me, resting her muzzle on my knee. Tears welled up again, the heaviness of everything crashing down. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in decades. Part of me wanted to call someone, my mother, a friend, but I had grown so isolated that I wasn't sure who would pick up or who would care. I decided to let the tears come, to purge the emotions I had been swallowing for so long. I cried for the love I lost, for the children who might never understand me, for the pain of a body threatened by disease, and for the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I would survive and carve out a new life. Eventually, the sobs quieted. Outside, dusk gave way to a deep blue sky. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the horizon. The ocean breathed in and out, a lullaby for the weary. I thought about my grandmother again, how she used to stand next to me in that old house, telling me stories of resilience, of women who overcame impossible odds. I imagined her voice telling me I was stronger than I knew. I let that memory wash over me, drawing what strength I could from it. That night, I slept fitfully, dreaming of hospital corridors and ghostly figures. But when morning came, I had a sense of purpose I couldn't ignore. First, I needed to find a local doctor. I had the name of a specialist from the hospital. I dialed their number, introduced myself, and arranged a consultation. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Then I made a grocery list, realized I needed some basics like plates, cups, bedding. The cottage was rented furnished, but just barely. Before leaving, I made sure Lady was comfortable, setting out her bowl and water. The day was sunny and mild, so I decided to take her with me, not wanting to leave her alone in this strange new place. We headed to the nearest town, just a few miles down the coast. It was a small community with a main street of local shops, a grocery store, a pharmacy, and a diner that smelled of bacon and coffee. As I walked through the aisles of the grocery store, I felt a pang of nostalgia for all the times I'd done this for my family, buying their favorite cereals, picking out the snacks they preferred. But now, I chose items for myself, focusing on fresh vegetables, lean meats, anything that might help me stay healthy during treatments. I paused at the bakery section, remembering how Cynthia used to love chocolate croissants. For a moment, I considered buying some on the off chance she might visit, but I shook the thought away. There was no guarantee she'd ever come around. That realization tore at me. Maybe I would always love them more than they loved me. But I pushed down the grief, telling myself I had to stay focused. At the pharmacy, I picked up the prescription medication the doctor had called in to help with the pain I'd been experiencing, a sign that the cancer was not content to remain hidden. The pharmacist, an older woman with kind eyes, asked if I was new in town. I nodded. She gave me a welcoming smile, told me about a local support group for people dealing with serious illnesses. I mumbled a polite thank you, not sure if I was ready for that yet. Then I dropped Lady off at a nearby pet supply store to pick out a better harness for her. The cheerful girl behind the counter cooed over how sweet she was, offering treats. Lady wagged her tail, a brief moment of happiness. Back at the cottage, I sorted through the groceries and found myself planning a real dinner for the first time in ages, just for me, but that was enough. I marinated a piece of chicken, roasted vegetables, and set the table with a single plate. It felt strange, almost absurd, to do that for myself. but I told myself I needed to start caring for my own well-being if I had any hope of facing what lay ahead. After dinner, I unpacked a few boxes, mostly the ones with clothes and toiletries. I found old photographs, glimpses of the family when we were all smiling, summer vacations, holiday gatherings, the kids' birthdays. I felt a stab of regret for how things turned out. I hadn't set out to become estranged from them. But life, choices, and personalities had collided in the worst way. My eyes lingered on a picture of me cradling a newborn Cynthia, her tiny fist clutched around my finger. I brushed away tears, carefully setting the photo aside. I wasn't ready to toss it, but neither could I display it. The next day, I visited the cancer center. The building was modern, with pale walls and large windows overlooking a landscaped garden. Everything smelled too clean, a place where pain and hope mingled in every corridor. A nurse guided me through paperwork, and then I was taken to meet Dr. Larkin, a soft-spoken but confident oncologist. She didn't sugarcoat the situation. The tumor was malignant, but it seemed we had caught it early. Aggressive chemotherapy was recommended, possibly surgery down the line. I felt my stomach churn, but nodded, absorbing her words. She asked about my support system, if anyone would be accompanying me to treatments. The question pierced me. I hesitated, then said I'd be on my own, that maybe a local volunteer group could help if I needed a ride. She looked at me with empathy and assured me they had resources for patients who were alone. For a moment, I wanted to collapse into tears, to scream that I wasn't supposed to be alone, that I had a family once. But I just thanked her politely. In the following weeks, I began chemotherapy. The first session left me nauseated, exhausted beyond anything I'd experienced. I lay on the couch in the cottage, Lady curled by my side, whimpering whenever I moaned. My hair started to thin in patches, and I noticed it on my pillow each morning. My phone beeped occasionally with messages, mostly from the doctor's office or bank notifications about the proceeds from the house sale. The kids didn't call, Peter didn't reach out. The only human contact I had was the medical staff, the pharmacist, and a friendly neighbor named Eileen who dropped by with fresh bread and introduced herself as a caretaker for her elderly mother. She offered her help if I ever needed someone to pick up groceries or just sit with me. The kindness of a near stranger was enough to make me cry again, but I managed to keep it together and murmur my gratitude. Despite the harsh side effects, I found a sense of liberation in my new life. Each morning, I could walk along the beach with Lady, watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. The salt air stung my cheeks, reminding me I was still alive, still capable of feeling. I spent quiet afternoons reading novels, letting my mind drift to places far from hospitals and heartbreak. Sometimes, I tried to imagine a future where I beat this, where I emerged stronger, maybe found a small circle of people who genuinely cared. Other times, the darkness crept in, telling me I was delusional, that I'd be consumed by the disease long before I found real happiness. But each time those dark thoughts threatened to overwhelm me, I'd picture the day I set that folder on the table, how they all pretended it didn't exist. I channeled my anger, my heartbreak, into a fierce determination. They didn't get to decide how my story ended. Some weeks passed, and one day, as I was napping on the couch, the doorbell rang. My heart pounded. Nobody visited without calling, not even Eileen. I opened the door to see Jordan standing there, hands shoved in his pockets. His face was full of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, confusion. I realized I hadn't seen him in nearly a month, and he looked older somehow, his eyes more shadowed. I felt a rush of maternal instinct, wanting to hug him, but the tension in his stance told me to keep my distance. He glanced around the small living room, noting the boxes still half unpacked, the blanket I used when chills from chemo set in. Lady wagged her tail, but Jordan didn't reach down to pet her. "Dad's losing it," he said after a moment, not meeting my eyes. "We're staying at Grandpa's house until he figures out a new place. Cynthia's basically never home. She's with friends or something." "I don't know." I swallowed, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry," I offered quietly. He shrugged, looked at the floor. "Why'd you do it?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why'd you just leave us?" 1,000 responses raced through my mind. but I settled on the truth. Because I was sick and no one cared, I said. Because I realized I was dying inside, even before the cancer. I had to save myself. His jaw tightened. You could have talked to me, he muttered. I let out a bitter laugh that I regretted immediately. I tried, I said, but you were all so busy ignoring me. He turned red, eyes flickering with guilt or anger, maybe both. Then he said, Is it true? The cancer? I felt my throat constrict. Yes, I managed. I'm getting treatment now. He hesitated. Are you gonna? He couldn't finish the question. I placed a hand on the doorframe to steady myself. I'm going to fight, I said. I'm doing everything I can. He nodded, eyes glistening. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. Then he turned away, mumbling something about needing money, needing help with school fees. My heart sank. He wasn't here because he genuinely wanted to see how I was doing. He needed something, and Peter had probably told him to try me. Without a word, I reached for my checkbook. My hands trembled, but I wrote the amount he needed. He took it without meeting my gaze, mumbling thanks. Then he lingered, as though he might say something else, apologize, or ask about my treatments. But the words never came, and he turned, walked out the door, and was gone. I leaned against the wall, tears stinging my eyes. At least he came, I told myself, but it felt hollow. I wondered if that check was the only thing he would remember me by. Chemo sessions stretched on. My hair fell out in larger clumps, so one morning I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and shaved the rest off, tears falling into the sink. I looked in the mirror at my pale scalp, the dark circles under my eyes. Then I put on a scarf and forced a shaky smile at my own reflection. This is temporary, I whispered. I am more than my hair. After that, I found a local thrift store that sold all sorts of scarves and hats, and I made a small project out of picking ones that made me feel less exposed. Eileen offered to drive me to some of my appointments when I was too weak, and I begrudgingly accepted, grateful for her kindness yet struggling with the sense of being a burden. One evening, I stumbled upon an old journal I used to keep before life got too hectic. Flipping through the pages, I saw entries filled with hopes and dreams, plans to travel, ideas for a small business, a vision of a loving family life. I sighed, feeling like I was reading the words of a stranger. But I also saw lines about resilience, about not settling for less than I deserved. My younger self had known something I'd lost along the way, that even in darkness, one should seek the light. That night, I wrote a new entry, describing my battle with cancer, my departure from the house, the shock of my children's indifference, and the fragile hope I clung to. I promised myself I would keep writing, documenting my journey so I wouldn't lose sight of how far I'd come. And so time moved on, in slow increments of treatments, recovery days, small errands, and lonely nights. Every so often, I'd find a text from Cynthia or Jordan, usually about money or some logistical question. Peter never contacted me directly, though I heard through the lawyer that he was trying to secure a smaller condo in the city. He insisted on disclaimers that he wasn't giving up on the divorce, that he'd fight me if I tried to claim alimony. My lawyer reminded him we had no joint assets except for a measly savings account. The house proceeds were mine in a trust, because that's how my grandmother had willed it. It made me wonder if he ever realized how his behavior had led us to this point. Probably not. But I refused to dwell on him, focusing instead on the next medical test, the next wave of nausea, the next fleeting moment of relief. Weeks became months, and the last chemo session arrived. Dr. Larkin told me with a cautious smile that the tumor had shrunk significantly, that the prognosis looked good, though surgery might still be a possibility down the line. I clung to that hope, letting myself smile for the first time in what felt like ages. I left the hospital and headed to the beach, ignoring the chill in the autumn air. Lady scampered along the shoreline, chasing seagulls that scattered into the sky. I stood with my feet in the cold surf, the water rushing around my ankles, and I let myself believe that maybe I had a real chance at life again. My scarf billowed in the wind, and I caught a reflection of myself in the water. A thinner face, tired eyes, but alive. That night, I treated myself to a quiet celebration, a simple meal, a scented candle flickering on the kitchen table. I didn't know if the children would ever come around, if they'd ever feel remorse for how they treated me. Part of me still ached for them, for the memories of sweet hugs and bedtime stories. But I also knew that healing might come in many forms, not just in the relationship with them. Maybe we would reconnect one day, maybe not. For now, I had to focus on mending my own soul. I started volunteering a few hours a week at the local library, drawn back to my old love of books. It was a small, quiet place where I could shelve titles and help children pick out reading material. The librarian, a gentle older man named Harold, was appreciative of the extra hands. He sensed I had been through something, but didn't pry. I found solace in the smell of worn pages, the hush of turning paper. Sometimes I'd look at the novels about strong women overcoming hardships, and I'd think, that could be me if I keep fighting. Eileen introduced me to a small group of women who met for coffee on Saturday mornings at the diner. They were a mix of ages, some retirees, some working part-time, some who had lost spouses or gone through divorces. At first, I was hesitant to join them, but Eileen insisted. That first Saturday, I sat among them, listening to their stories, hearing about heartbreaks, joys, frustrations. One woman, Lucy, had survived breast cancer years ago and offered me quiet words of support. Another, Mara, was caring for her disabled father. They spoke with candor about their struggles, not in a self-pitying way, but in a supportive, we're all in this together way. I realized I had missed the sense of community, of being seen and accepted. When it was my turn, I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. Eventually, I managed a shaky explanation of my situation, how I had sold my house, left my family, was battling cancer. They listened without judgment, eyes brimming with empathy. I felt something crack open inside me, a release of shame and guilt, replaced by the warmth of shared understanding. Over time, these small acts, volunteering at the library, meeting with the women for coffee, taking Lady for walks along the shore, became the fabric of my new life. My energy levels still fluctuated, my hair was still sparse, and I carried the fear of a recurrence. But I also carried a newfound appreciation for every breath, every sunrise, every small moment of peace. Once, I would have done anything to have my old life back, to be surrounded by my kids and the illusions of marital security. Now, I knew I deserved better. I had discovered the power of choosing myself. And then, one late afternoon, as I was tidying up the living room, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Cynthia. She looked thinner, her makeup smudged, eyes red as though she'd been crying. Without a word, she stepped inside, wrapping her arms around her torso defensively. Lady sniffed her feet, but Cynthia barely acknowledged her. I braced myself, not sure if she was here to hurl accusations or ask for money or both. She glanced around, took in the modest surroundings, then her gaze rested on me. "Mom," she said, her voice shaky, "I saw the papers in that folder." "I'm sorry." My heart nearly stopped. I just nodded, motioning for her to sit on the couch. She hesitated before sinking down, eyes downcast. I didn't know it was that serious. Dad never told us. He just said you were being dramatic. But then I opened it last week. I saw everything." Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you force us to look at it?" The question hung in the air, laden with guilt and regret. I lowered myself into an armchair. "I tried to tell you, all of you," I said softly. "But you never wanted to hear. I couldn't beg for your help." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know. I'm sorry." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she confessed that living with Peter and her grandparents was miserable. She felt suffocated. She realized that the family dynamic had been toxic for a long time. She was worried about me, especially after reading the medical reports. My heart clenched at the thought that she finally knew. "I'm in remission," I explained, cautious. "Chemo's done for now, but I have to be monitored." She wiped her tears, nodding. "That's good. I'm glad." A shaky silence followed, until she finally said, "Mom, can I stay with you for a while?" just until I figure out my next steps. My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to leap across the room and hug her, to say yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. But another part was still wounded, hesitant to open that door too quickly. Yet I couldn't turn her away. Okay, I said gently, but we have to have some ground rules. Respect. Honesty. I'm not going through what I went through at the old house. She nodded fervently, tears renewed. I promise. I was such a jerk, and I can't fix it overnight, but I want to try. And so, slowly, Cynthia moved a few bags into the tiny guest bedroom. She told me about her fights with Jordan, how he was angry at the world, how Peter was growing more bitter. She confessed that she missed me, that she felt guilty for not asking about my health earlier. I didn't sugarcoat my own hurt. I told her how abandoned I felt, how lonely the chemo had been. I admitted I still wasn't sure I could trust her fully, but I wanted to try too. Through halting conversations, tears, and tentative laughter, we began to rebuild something fragile but real. She even accompanied me to a follow-up appointment, sitting nervously in the waiting room. Afterward, we walked on the beach, neither of us sure what to say, but both clinging to the hope that maybe a bridge could be rebuilt. The day the final divorce papers arrived, I found Cynthia in the kitchen, making tea. She looked up and asked if I was okay. I said yes, that I was more than okay, that I was free. She managed a small smile. I'm proud of you, she said, and my eyes brimmed with tears, because it had been so long since I heard those words from anyone in my family. In that moment, I thought back to the day I left that cancer report on the table, the swirl of betrayal and sadness that consumed me. I remembered how I felt invisible, worthless, how I never imagined I'd find the strength to walk away. And yet, I had. I sold the house, took my dog, and saved my own life in more ways than one. Today, I stand on the porch of this cottage, a cool breeze rustling my newly growing hair. The scarf days are mostly behind me, though I keep them folded neatly in a drawer as a reminder of what I endured. Inside, Cynthia is humming softly, her life not perfect, but on a better path than before. We talk more now, share more. She's still discovering who she is outside the toxic bubble we once called home. I'm discovering who I am without the constraints of that old life. Sometimes, Jordan calls or texts, still distant but less hostile. He's finishing up high school, might come visit in the summer. Part of me holds on to the hope that one day he'll forgive me or understand. If he doesn't, I'll still keep living. I close my eyes, listening to the waves in the distance, remembering the swirl of heartbreak and defiance that propelled me away from that table where the cancer report lay abandoned. It's a bittersweet memory now, a turning point that forced me to reclaim my worth. A seagull cries overhead and Lady barks from inside, signaling she wants to come out and play. I open the door for her, smiling as she bounds onto the porch. She looks up at me with those soulful eyes, and I whisper, "We made it, lady. We made it." She wags her tail, and I let out a breath I feel like I've been holding for years. I don't know what the future holds, further treatments, possible setbacks, maybe more heartbreak. But I do know this, when they ignored my desperate plea for help, I found the courage to walk away, to choose myself, and that choice might just be the reason I'm still standing. I ran from a life where I was invisible, and I found a shore where I can see myself clearly. I sold the house, took the dog, and gained my freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I feel alive.